Okay, everybody, so we're at about 5 minutes past the hour, just waiting for the last few people to show up, but we will go ahead and begin the webinar, as I know everyone's got a tight schedule today. Today we will be discussing a case study of a recent customer acquisition of ours and how they're tackling the problem of SSH key management in their enterprise environment. This should be a great case study for folks looking at what it takes to get yourself back into compliance and also gain higher levels of security with OpenSSH or TechT-SSH in your environment. Just a little bit about SSH communication security, just for those of you who probably are aware of the protocol and some of you that may not be aware of the company. We are the inventors of the SSH protocol. We're one of the most widely used protocols in the world with millions of software deployments worldwide. It's shipped obviously with every Linux, Unix, and Mac, and also easily downloadable to Windows machines as well, and very popular on the mainframe. With over 3,000 customers worldwide, including 7 of the Fortune 10, we have a very strong footprint customer base that allows us to leverage a great deal of expertise and use case scenarios into our product line that other companies simply can't match. We deliver a platform-based approach to secure shell deployment, management, monitoring, and data loss prevention, and that is a project and process that we've developed since 2011 with our customers to sort of bring data in transit to the next level. It's something that's been around for quite some time, since the late 90s, and now we're looking at this from the standpoint of what do we need to do from the standpoint of conquering new compliance challenges as well as meeting security challenges put out there by advanced threat vectors and advanced persistent threats and things like that. Just some of our customers to get an idea of the verticals that we're in, but this is not exclusive. Energy and utilities, government organizations, financial organizations, retail organizations, and healthcare. Obviously, if we're looking across different types of compliance mandates, with government you have FISMA and NIST. With financial you can have a variety of things such as SOX and PCI, as well as some other requirements from other countries. In retail, you're mostly looking at SOX and most likely PCI. Healthcare obviously is getting touched on by HIPAA, as well as many PCI issues there as well. And energy and utilities can come under a couple different guidelines depending if they're mission critical systems such as gas lines or power electricity grid type organizations. If they're working with the government, also if they're using payment cards, they become under the PCI requirements. In addition, if they're public, they're going to be covered by SOX as well. So now to our information assurance platform. So beginning in 2011, we went back to our customer base and began talking to them about what they need in their environment to sort of meet the modern compliance mandates and emerging threat vectors that are out there. And essentially came back with the gold standard in the data in transit space is really SSH, the Secure Shell Protocol. That's the trusted method and is utilized by obviously many companies for the mission critical data transfers, both for interactive users and also for application to application type users. What we came to find out and discover is that while the SSH protocol and Secure Shell Protocol plays a critical role in what we call the plumbing layer of the organization, basically moving things from point to point inside the organization and providing access to remote administrators, there was a need to build on top of that a framework to allow for easy configuration of the environment, easy deployment of the environment, really getting a handle on access controls through key management, and also auditing the entire network so that you can actually see what's going on inside the environment. So you can get some of those security intelligence concepts such as being able to inspect traffic in real time in the environment and apply DLP to the encrypted network the same way that you would for any data that's passed in the clear. In addition to that, also looking at cost savings and some of the manual processes that were involved in environments, automation became a big concept that we really looked at tackling as well as our authentication through our client and server technology and enhancing that usability, extending those capabilities, which has been a mainstay in many of the largest organizations in the world for quite some time. At the end of the day, our solutions are designed to be minimally invasive and reduce costs. So basically, we're looking at this of laying on top of the plumbing of the environment and laying our architecture on top of that for the information assurance platform, so that you don't have to do a heavy lift and rip and replace of an environment or make major changes, but making it fully interoperable with both Tectia SSH solutions as well as OpenSSH as well, which that makes up the majority of the market for SSH worldwide. So let's get right into the case study. So let's talk about the customer, a top 5 international bank. They have a $2.5 trillion in assets and a global presence, which, as we know, in a global environment, delivers complex compliance requirements. From a security standpoint, they're also a high-value target for advanced persistent threats and other advanced threat vectors. So clearly, any kind of security hole in these organizations, once they discover it, they want to find a solution for it as fast as possible. This is especially true in the banking sector, and especially true when we're talking about encrypted networks, which hold the most critical information assets. Is really the gold vein for a hacker if they can get in there to really do some damage or make themselves a handy profit. The environment itself is about 10,000 hosts with running OpenSSH, 500 plus applications, and 20,000 user accounts within the secure shell network. So it's a large environment. It's an OpenSSH environment, and it's an international environment, which obviously leads to a number of different compliance issues. And the problem here is that there was a Monetary Authority of Singapore finding that there was an issue there with compliance as well as a potential SOX issue, and not yet tested for, but also probably would have fallen in line with the emerging PCI mandates that are in place and more specific ones that are due to come out in the next year or so, a potential for PCI issues as well. So the customer had an external audit. They were flagged for this as something they needed to fix. It became one of the higher priority projects in the environment. And as we looked at other banks in the environment that we've been talking to, as well as retail organizations of all types and sizes, commercial customers in various different industries, we're finding that what this in particular bank was flagged for, most public organizations would also be flagged for, as well as auditors learn how to test for this type of issue. So the external audit issues are coming up more and more with people coming to us saying, just like this bank did, we have an audit issue. It's revealed obviously a security issue, and we need to resolve this quickly and as soon as possible. Highlighting the problem in the audit, and from what the information the customer was sharing with us, they couldn't do a number of things, and this was creating both a security issue and also the compliance issue. They could not ensure that only authorized users could access the systems, particularly the production systems, which are very important to a bank, obviously moving massive amounts of data around involving financial transactions every day. In addition, they could not prevent unauthorized changes in the production environment. So essentially, someone who was operating in the development area could come in, use the access keys as a backdoor, and even if they were granted temporary access to the production environment, were able to retain that capability to make those, to access those systems and make changes, even if those were beyond the limits of access. So the next point there is they could not limit access to need to know, need to do. And of course, we know in best practices environments, we want to make sure that people only have access to things that they need to know or need to do. Otherwise, it creates the potential for risk in the environment that just isn't necessary and oftentimes holds us out of our compliance mandates and creates an issue. In addition to that, they weren't able to monitor the environment for unauthorized access. So even if someone, they were able to get some controls over the environment, if they didn't have an ongoing solution that could allow them to continuously monitor the environment, that was going to create an issue as well, because even though they could fix it once, the problem would simply reemerge after the remediation project was completed. In addition to that, they needed the ability to remove, rotate, and recertify access, basically applying the same types of controls that you have over username and password for interactive users such as your office manager, and making sure that you have the same kind of processes in place for an administrator who is accessing critical information systems. Obviously, we know that external threats, someone getting a hold of a key, is a big issue, but also looking at this from the standpoint of internal bad actors as well who have access to a key, and potentially if that's root, that can create a large issue. So these were the things that were mostly seen, flagged by a compliance issue, Monetary Authority of Singapore, then looking at this from the SOX, that's the trigger, then the second trigger, and now we're looking at the security details and the compliance details, things the customer needed to do and could not do. So from there, the customer came up with their basic requirements. We have obviously a larger requirements document for this, but number one, they wanted to meet compliance requirements. So they needed to get themselves back in shape so they could fully meet their requirements for various jurisdictions that they were operating in. They needed to control who could access their production systems via SSH. That's something that they couldn't do because there were backdoors, and they wanted to eliminate the backdoor access to production systems via the SSH keys. They also wanted to create and enforce clear policies between production and development so that they were able to make sure that production administrators were not in the development systems operating outside of the approvals processes that were in place. Obviously, because there's QA and testing going on between especially the applications that were in place, the 500 applications plus applications, as I said, those are mission critical applications that take place every day. And literally tens of thousands of transactions are taking place all the time. So the organization was looking at really how do we protect our ongoing business and business continuity by making sure that we don't have people in areas we don't need them in. And the ability to continuously monitor the access capabilities of the production environment, or people who could access the production environment, period, making sure that people only had a limited range of access to what they needed to have access to do their job. And also having a centralized solution to discover, monitor, deploy, remove and rotate keys. And this was also a cost savings issue as we've got the compliance issue, the security issue. And fortunately with this, we're actually able to deliver a centralized solution that's actually able to reduce cost significantly and reduce overhead, and also put people on higher priority projects other than provisioning keys through manual processes. In addition to that, they're looking for on-site key remediation, project management, and services, because it takes a degree of expertise to understand exactly how to bring your environment under control, and most importantly, to do so in a fashion that allows you to continue to do business as normal. Basically, you don't want to break your systems. So the vendor selection process involved multiple vendors engaged in the process itself. Only Universal SSH Key Manager could deliver complete key management visibility capabilities, including discovery, management, monitoring, and reporting. And only SSH Communications Security had the experience to provide project management, deployment, and remediation services. So when we're looking at this against a broad vendor landscape of different types of capabilities, when we're looking at Universal SSH Key Manager had the only capability to really go in and go beyond discovery, because discovery just tells you have a problem. It doesn't give you the ability to act. With Universal SSH Key Manager, and we'll go into this more in the presentation, you've got the ability to actually go in and manage the provisioning processes, the monitoring processes, the continuous monitoring processes that are so critical once you've got the environment fixed, plus the automated removal of keys and access to users. You can plug this into your LDAP. You could also plug this into your SIEM if you wanted to. And that all ties into your monitoring and reporting capabilities. Obviously, at the end of the day for this as well, the auditors are going to come in and do testing. And we also want to be able to submit reports into the auditors as well as internal management to show them exactly what's going on in the environment, to show them that the environment is under control. And again, only SSH Communications Security has the experience to provide this level of project management. We invented the protocol, so we know how it works quite well. And while there's a lot of different companies who have attempted to come around with something like a Kerberos type solution, it still doesn't resolve the key management issue where you have to be able to lock down the keys in the environment in order to maintain security and close that back door. So really, with one of the most ubiquitous protocols in the software that drives it in the world, with OpenSSH and TechTSSH, really this was the choice that the top 5 international bank chose. Step 1, so let's go into the processes that were involved with remediation. Step 1 was discovery. So obviously you've got to know what you're dealing with. So as we went into the environment, we wanted to discover all existing trust relationships, which essentially is just looking for all user keys in the environment, matching private and public keys, and seeing where those map to in the environment so you can see what they're doing. Some people get a little confused with SSH, and if they're an admin, they think that it's just an administrator tool to log in remotely. But application managers also know that SSH is used to transfer data across the environment. So we're looking at this from the standpoint of looking at both the machine-to-machine or application-to-application type communications as well as the interactive users. It's a very important way to distinguish that because some of the largest users of the network are actually the applications, and this in this particular instance, this company, about 85% of their secure shell network usage is through application, not from remote admin. So the importance to discover all of those and determine which keys are actually being used and where those keys are being used from, again, if it's a one-to-one, one-to-many, or multiple sources. Step 2 process is monitoring. So you want to be able to monitor the environment in order to determine which keys are actually being used and where the keys are used from. Again, looking from one or multiple sources, you're going to get an idea of what the environment's doing. You're going to get an idea of what changes are occurring in the environment. This is sort of the second step of the discovery process and the monitoring process, and that continues on throughout the entire process until you bring the environment into lockdown. And still in the monitoring phase, as we look at the keys, we find more keys, and we discover keys in the environment, systems get plugged in. We remove the orphan keys and the keys that are no longer in use. So we can say, okay, there's a lot of keys on here. That's a lot of basically noise in the environment. We can go ahead and remove those keys because we know they're no longer being used and they don't map to anything. Step 3 is we're going to lock down the environment. So we're going to go into the environment. We're going to say, okay, it's time to lock it down. So we're going to enforce approvals through proper processes for all key setups and other key operations. So inside of the bank did have processes in place where people had to log in through a certain solution in order for them to access certain servers. Well, of course, they were able to use the SSH keys as a backdoor because they weren't controlled. So during the lockdown process, we're actually able to enforce proper processes, and the way we do that is by relocating all authorized keys to a root-owned location and changing the SSH configuration accordingly so that the connections will still work. We can then restrict key operations so that only the key manager or root can create or remove new authorized keys, and also we can detect unauthorized key operations occurring outside the key manager, such as keys being set up by a root user. So obviously if someone has root access to a system, they could access the server and the file where you're storing the keys, and that could then create a significant issue from a control standpoint. So we can actually want to be able to monitor any types of rogue keys that would be created on the environment that wouldn't be coming from the key manager. And for that, we want real-time intelligence, so we want to be able to generate alerts about all key-related activities so that we can see if something is going on in the environment that is putting us at risk. On step 4, we look at automating the processes. So we want to really reduce the number of administrators who can have access control, which is basically key creation and removal privileges. We want to eliminate manual work and reduce human errors or costs with automated key creation and key removals. So essentially, you're going to reduce your risk here by taking what could be potentially hundreds upon hundreds of people who are creating keys in the environment, restricting that back to a core group of people who are responsible for provisioning. Because everything's locked down in the environment, everything's going to come from the key manager. If someone does have root access or administrative access to a server, if they try to create a key outside of the environment, you're going to get an alert for that. And you're going to know that that person is doing that, and they know that that's outside of the scope of what they should be doing from a provisioning standpoint. And in addition to that, what that's doing is it's actually going to eliminate the manual work, which is actually going to save time and money, but also the human errors related to actually key creation, setting something up incorrectly or too weak of a key, or losing a key, putting it on a fob and losing it, something like that. That's actually also going to be very helpful with the automation processes going forward. Step 5, rotation and certification. Customer also wanted to be able to rotate every authorized key and corresponding identity keys to time limit the risk by compromised or copied keys. They also want to periodically certify you have access to what and remove access when it is no longer required. So essentially, they want to come back and do a key rotation, and then they want to be able to certify that that individual still needs to have access to the system. One of their main challenges is between the production and the development teams is actually once a development person is given access to a server, they were retaining access much longer than what was required, but because of the challenges of removing keys and not really able to centrally control this, it was impossible to know which key was doing what and to certify who really should have access to what in the environment. So in addition to that, we want to look at sort of the broader scope, the SSH IAP Services and Information Assurance Platform Services. In this particular case with the customer, we've experienced no downtime in the production environment. Our services have included deployment configuration of SSH servers, integration of key management systems to existing ticketing, change control, and approval systems, automation of key removal and rotation, and remediation of key-related compliance problems. Going through some of these larger processes by having a company do it by themselves has a challenge involved in that you don't want your existing environment to break. We've actually undertaken the largest key management projects in the world, SSH key management projects in the world, and some very intense environments with a very short window, very short fuse, I guess you could say, for any tolerance for downtime in the production environment. So we're able to integrate our processes and our solutions into the existing framework of a business, able to go in there and really help an organization get through the key remediation process and up to what we call a leveled environment so that they can move forward with our key management solution and get that up and running as quickly as possible. So let's look at now why SSH key management is so critical. So we've talked about the customer use case, but now let's talk about a little bit about the environment that you may be dealing with as well. The current state of perimeter security. So if we look at the perimeter, we went through this period of trying to create Fortress GM or Fortress SSH or Fortress, whatever your company's name is, Fortress Dell, for instance. And you could say, well, we tried to create an absolutely secure perimeter, but we also know that the perimeter isn't impenetrable. So we have to sort of create a zero trust model where we don't necessarily trust everything inside. And we know this because something like a spear phishing attack, which happened with RSA and that led to the breach of their Secure ID product, it's core code that allowed people to actually attempt to break into systems through the second factor of authentication methods. We know that came from a fairly, seems benign, almost simple attack where you send a macro in with a virus to an employee that says your bonus plan, and all of a sudden they open it up and it gets into the system and that crawls around for a while, and all of a sudden, however many months or years later, all of a sudden you've got a major breach on your hands. And this is also what's called an advanced persistent threat. So we know these external threats are there and that the perimeter is porous, but we also know that we have people inside who are considered malicious insiders and they pose a significant threat. They're authorized to operate behind the perimeter, and it's very difficult to control, especially in environments that aren't controlled, such as the case in this case study prior to SSH coming in and doing the key remediation project. It's also getting more and more difficult to control in the bring your own device and cloud environments, and also within the extended enterprise environment where you have multiple external contractors working inside your networks. So the current state of key management, what most folks are experiencing out there in the space is that as most technologies go down the pipeline of production and being in the environment and being widely used, what we find over time is there's certain new complexities, certain new requirements that come into the market and really impact that technology's ability to effectively protect us, and that also triggers, in often cases, compliance requirements. So if we look at the current state of key management, we can oftentimes see that most organizations that we talk to, that they're not able to account for users effectively. They don't know who has access to what information, and they have no centralized control over key creation. They're also unable to identify trust relationships, and they lack key removal and rotation capabilities, and they can't standardize on key size, type, or strength. Much of the things we talked about in the case study, we find this in almost every organization that we go into, regardless of what they're using, what solutions they're using, simply because this is now the next generation of identity and access management. This is the phase 2, which is getting control of your encrypted networks and your administrator networks, as well as what the information assets your privileged users have access to, and monitoring capabilities. So if we look at this from just the standpoint of how viable is SSH as a attack vector, well, here you're looking at SSH brute force attacks from IBM's X-Force report. And we know that this is continuing to spike, and not because there's an inherent flaw with SSH, but because people are going through environments, and this is basically from internet-facing SSH environments, trying to hack into these using username and password guessing. So organizations that have weak password controls, this is obviously a big issue, but we also know that if someone gets behind the perimeter and finds a key or has a key, that they can also easily gain access to a large swath of the enterprise, which could create a pretty significant risk as well. And I also want to talk, too, we've been talking a little bit about key management and key management capabilities, but we also want to look at this from the standpoint of what is our encrypted channel auditing standpoint. So phase 1, someone could come in with a key management issue and we resolve that for them. Well, that guards sort of things as they come through the front door, but encrypted channel auditing actually provides auditing of the environment so that security ops and forensics teams aren't blinded by encryption. So in this case, we're talking about our Crypto Auditor product, which is going to deliver the ability to know which users are compromised should an event happen, or who engaged in malicious activities. It also gives you the ability to give your security ops and forensics teams the ability to do investigations because of how it's structured to actually, in an inline fashion, review the traffic across the network, even the encrypted traffic, inline and on the fly, decrypt it, review it, and then move on. This eliminates a lot of problems, as we call blinding, for the environment itself. And you have a lot of times, especially in PCI environments, some conflicting information or conflicting mandates where, on the one hand, they are requiring organizations to eliminate as much as possible the clear text transfer of data. On the other hand, if you do that, once things enter the encrypted channel, it makes it very difficult to remediate a threat or figure out what exactly is going on in the environment. And this also leads to a current state analysis of our data loss prevention, which also plugs into Crypto Auditor, and this is part of the overall information assurance platform. Currently, organizations really aren't able to prevent data loss on encrypted networks, and they're unable to monitor and inspect the content transmitted across the encrypted networks in real time. And it's not integrated into their SIEM and security intelligence architecture. So this also plays into the Crypto Auditor solution that we have as well. And I just want to mention that too, because once you have the keys under management, you control the access, you also still need to be realistic about the threats that are from insiders or from anything that's crossing your network that you may not want to be exposed to the outside or get outside the environment. With Crypto Auditor, this really provides a great solution for that in tandem with our key management solution. So let's talk a little bit about business drivers, and we can go through this as I think people will understand this from the standpoint of an external threat vector. Basically, if an attacker breaches the perimeter, the attacker acquires the keys, and the attacker can access the servers. Obviously, at that point, without you knowing, the attacker can extract the information, that's accessed through an encrypted tunnel. And that's where Crypto Auditor would come in place, where you would say, okay, we can actually review that information before it leaves, and you can actually shut down the connection. Obviously, in an ideal place, before anyone ever got to the information assets, you would want to provide the access control mechanisms, which you would do through our key manager, to, in the first place, prevent them from getting into the information assets in the period. And of course, we're looking at this from the standpoint, too, of if we go into an environment and we find, in the case, our case study here, example, we had about 1.5 million keys in their environment. About 10% of those keys were unknown and had root access. So inside of the environment, that included Unix and Linux servers. In addition to that, we also cover the mainframe and IBM mainframe solutions, as well as Windows. So if you can imagine, just in the case study that we had there, a Unix and Linux environment where someone has a root access key, that can pose a significant risk. And what we've found going in and surveying organizations, most organizations have 8 to 100 SSH keys configured, granting access to each Unix Linux server. So that's a lot of keys on an environment. As I said, these grant high administrative access, and the mesh of key-based access is so dense that it's highly likely that if there were to be an attack of some kind, the attack could spread to a large chunk of the servers in the organization pretty quickly. And this risk increases substantially if the virus or cyber attack also utilizes other attack vectors to escalate privileges to root or high-level administrator after penetrating the server. And this is what we call the existential threat. So as we look at organizations, especially banks and other high-value, high-target, publicly traded companies especially, or companies that deal in national infrastructure, because SSH is so prevalent in their environment, it's better not to wait until one of your root access keys is compromised and someone's able to grab a hold of a large cluster of your environment, because that could create a potential serious problem for the organization. And as we've looked at these environments, we can see this, and we can see that the potential is there for a really significant scenario. And we know from the IBM X-Force reports that folks are in Eastern Europe and China and other parts of the world who are malicious bad actors are actually targeting these organizations. But there's also the internal threat vector as well. So we have to be aware that we've got people operating on the inside who are considered malicious insiders, as I've talked about before, and they're allowed to have access to servers with authorized keys. And And many of these servers don't have DLP capabilities, so once someone has access to these servers, they can do pretty much whatever they want. They're not going to really be noticed. Now this is where Crypto Auditor comes into place, because we're actually going to be able to monitor any traffic along the network, as well as any assets that are taken out through the encrypted network. So that's going to provide for an extra layer of security for internal threat vectors. In addition to that, with Key Manager, Universal SSH Key Manager, you're going to be able to lock down the environment, your information assets. So if you've got a malicious insider in your environment, and they do something in one part of the environment, they don't have access to potentially hundreds of production servers or in the environment. And of course, in most organizations, you're not going to know who this person is. With Crypto Auditor and Key Manager, you're going to have better identity access management controls on your environment, as well as privileged user monitoring on encrypted channels, which provides that extra level, an extra layer of security. So let's just wrap up here a little bit with business drivers and compliance. We've talked a little bit about some compliance drivers such as PCI DSS. We're actually very involved with PCI, the PCI Council. We've gone to the events, we go to the special interest group meetings as well and contribute to that. And we actually submitted 5 updates to PCI, which are now up for consideration, and that's moving down the pipeline as well. And you're going to start to see changes to PCI requirements. We actually have a white paper on our website about those changes. So if you're a PCI covered entity, then you'll want to keep this in mind. There's also testing tools as well as testing services that are coming along, and also training, so that PCI folks in the government space such as NIST and FISMA and SOX and Monetary Authority of Singapore and HIPAA, all of these covered entities will have to really be aware of the fact that the alternative to interactive authentication, interactive user authentication such as username and password, the alternative methods such as certificates and keys, now those are going to become under closer scrutiny, because those actually have access to even higher levels of information than what the current mandates explicitly say. Although an auditor can still, even without the updates to the mandates, can actually flag this based upon their interpretation of the rules as they stand. And let's look at cost too, because we're talking a lot about security and compliance, and some of these things are, looking at how are you going to pay for this? What's the business driver? I need my CFO to check off the box to say, hey, we can move ahead with this project. In most cases, SSH key management operations are done manually. It's usually a 6-step process: key request, approval process, key pair creation, transfer of keys, configuration, and testing. And in a large organization, we actually went into and did an economic analysis with 20,000 systems in the environment, with about 10,000 new key setups per year, and the average time per setup at 15 minutes, and the other data as is laid out there. If it costs you $59 per hour for a security admin, the estimated operational cost per year is almost $4 million for this 20,000 host environment. So that's pretty significant when you look at that over a 10-year period, considering the cost of actually replacing this time charge with a solution that's going to provide compliance and security in addition to the cost benefits. And in this case, most organizations that have people manually provisioning keys, those folks would gladly tell you they'd like to work on something higher priority than provisioning those keys. It's a time-consuming and tedious process without a centralized solution. Plus, it doesn't give you the security or controls that you really want. So let's just wrap up the webinar today with just sort of summing up how to bring SSH keys under control. So based on our experience with customers, as in this use case, the following approach for bringing SSH keys under management provides compliance and saves costs, and also increases security. So 1, we want to be able to discover the environment. 2, we want to be able to automate creation and removal of keys and trust relationships. And 3, we want to be able to automatically rotate, renew, or remove keys. And in order to do this in the key remediation process, that's where you're going to need the expertise of a company like SSH Communications Security, where we can fairly confidently say we're the only organization potentially in the world that can effectively bring a no production downtime key remediation process to an enterprise environment and successfully have you on the road to full deployment fairly quickly. So if anyone has any questions for me, go ahead and send me those through the chat. If not, you can email me at jason.thompson@ssh.com. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.